All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Karen Milliken. I'm the CCO of JoyDew Foundation, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And we're just thrilled to see so many attendees who are having interest in building a new future for people on the spectrum. And we're especially excited about our distinguished panelists today, and I'd like to introduce. I'll start with Rob Austin. Many of you may know him. He's the Digital Innovation Professor and Evolution of Work Chair at Information Systems at Ivy Business School in Western University in Canada, and also an affiliated faculty member at Harvard Medical School with prior faculty roles at Copenhagen Business School, Harvard Business School, where he chaired the CIO executive program for more than a decade. And his work sits at the intersection of technology management, creativity, innovation, and the evolution of work, including research and writing on the neurodiversity employment movement. And he's authored numerous articles, cases, and books used widely in business education. So welcome, Rob. Nita Berkshadker is an executive director of the Taft Foundation, and she leads impactful grant making that expands opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD as we call it. She also serves as treasurer of the Children's Aid College Prep Charter School, championing educational access and community-driven support. She's a seasoned philanthropic leader, and Nina's recognized for advancing inclusive initiatives and driving meaningful, lasting change. So welcome to you, Nina. Dave Caudell is the Associate Director at the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2009, Dr. Dave Caudell is a passionate advocate for neurodivergence, speaking internationally, including at the United Nations. His career spans diverse roles as a soldier, journalist, and corporate professional before earning his PhD in physics. At Vanderbilt, he focuses on creating innovative pathways to meaningful employment for adults on the spectrum, aligning individual strengths with real-world business needs. So welcome, Dave. Jen Feldman is an inclusion consultant and head of strategic partnerships at Specialis Stern USA, where she partners with employers to identify gaps in inclusive recruiting and retention and expand accessible pathways for neurodivergent talent. With a background spanning developmental IO psychology and advanced study in social work and social policy, she's a longtime neurodiversity advocate focused on helping workplaces to keep humanness at the center of inclusion. So welcome, Jen. Vincent Grimaldi de Puget is a creator of the Alchemistus, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, neurodiversity management program at the École de Pons Business School, and he is a leading neurodiversity advocate whose research and training focus on workplace inclusion and the success of neurodivergent professionals. Combining academic expertise with lived experience, Vincent helps organizations build more understanding, equitable, and high-performing environments. Welcome, Vincent. Moish is the co-founder of and CEO and board chairman of JoyDew Foundation, which is bringing a background as a seasoned entrepreneur and life science technology executive, including leadership of high growth startups, and prior service as an IDF Special Forces Elite Unit Commander. He founded JoyDew as a social enterprise, informed by his lived experience as the father of 2 autistic sons. JoyDew provides a lifespan solution for adults with autism that presumes competence and focuses on strengths, and includes a day program that offers job training and employment, a social community of lifelong friends, safe and friendly housing, and parent support to navigate the complex autism industry. And finally, we have Jose Velasco, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations from the Autism Society of America. Jose leads digital transformation, strategic planning, and employment initiatives at the Autism Society of America. Previously, he spent decades at SAP, where he spearheaded the Autism at Work program, creating hundreds of opportunities for autistic individuals. He also founded the Autism at Work Summit, which is a global forum connecting the private sector, government, academia, and the autism community to advance inclusion and opportunity. So welcome, Jose.
And thank you.
Yes.
Apologies, Karen. I think I still just see your first intro slide.
Okay, that's no problem at all. So let me apologize that there
There we
are
go.
all the people. So you probably see them also in your Zoom call, but those are their professional pictures. So thank you, Ellie, for letting me know that hadn't come up.
Awesome. Thank you.
And Ellie is also with JoyDew, and she's helping us to manage this program today. So thank you, Ellie, for taking care of setting this whole event up. We appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to just start with doing a little bit of level setting for everybody. We are here today to try to reimagine the future for adults with autism. And we're particularly focused on these non-speaking or those requiring higher levels of support. Really, we're hoping to find a way to allow people with autism to fully contribute to society. They have a lot of gifts, and we all want to make sure that they're able to leverage those gifts for the good of the society. And also, we want to be able to reduce the support that's required, so it makes it more possible for them to be able to contribute more easily. We also want to explore innovative models, systems reform, employment equity, and community building strategies. So we actually got the panel together electronically previous to this meeting to be able to talk a little bit about what are some of the most important things that we need to focus on in order to be able to accomplish these things. And they've given some answers back as to their highest priorities. And based on that, we'll be having them answer questions. But prior to that, we thought we would start with just making sure that everybody that's on the call is familiar with the situation. So as you probably know, autism has been increasing at an incredible rapid rate. I think we've now figured out that it went from a 1 in 250 people to 1 in 31 as of the last CDC work that was done. So when you think about that, then you discover that 80% of them have significant communication difficulties, with about half of them non-speaking. And then that it's impacting about 5.4 million people estimated in the US today. That's impacting about 21.6 million people in total because of the fact that it impacts the entire family. So it's a lot of people that are all of a sudden being affected by autism. And that's part of the reason for the focus here. And autism is a medical condition, but it is not an intellectual disability as a lot of people think it is. And so there's a lot of discussion about this. I won't get into it too much because there's a lot of challenges in the medical community with how this is all coded and so on. It's a neurological condition, but the cause is not really known. There's lots of research going on about that, but right now we really don't understand it. So what we do know is that about 100% of people with autism need some kind of support. 80% can't live independently, and 37% need support 24/7. And most people have no idea that that's the case, but and we will have all of this data for you with the citations available at the end of this call. But it gives you a sense of how much support is currently required. And of course, it's impacting the entire family. But said simply, I guess people with autism have brains that are just wired differently than others, and they can be wired up in ways that are incredible with heavy information processing that can allow them to see patterns and things that other people miss, memorize vast amounts of information, or notice the smallest variation in the sound, for example. At the same time, they may lack the wiring for speech, or they have sensory sensitivities that make bright lights or sounds almost impossible to bear, or they may have severe anxiety or repetitive behaviors like stimming. So there are these differences that are really important to understand as we move forward in this discussion. So the challenge here that we have that a lot of the panelists talked about was the results of a broken ecosystem. We have all these different groups on the left that need to be able to support people on the spectrum, but it's very disjointed and in many ways just broken. So we see the benefits and support services in every state are completely different. They're all working out, and they've all been set up mostly 50 years ago. So they're working on old ways of doing things. So a lot of money is being spent, but it's being spent in ways that maybe are not efficient. In education, and all the statistics I'm sharing with you, by the way, are all for the US. So my apologies to our overseas colleagues, but this is the information that we had available. So in education in the US, only 19% ever graduate high school, but the real problem starts in childhood with most of them being sent to special needs schools where they spend a lot of the day in ABA training, trying to teach them how to fit into the neurotypical world instead of receiving the same educational content as their peers. So it should be no surprise then that when they leave school, only about 14% of them end up employed at all. There's, between 14 to 22%, depending on which statistics you look at. And most of that is in part-time, low-wage, unskilled work that doesn't even last for 2 years. So it's actually probably worse than that in some ways. So also contributing to that low employment rate is, of course, the government benefit structure, going back to benefits, which disincentivizes work because if you make too much money, then you lose your Medicaid benefits, which is a definite requirement for a lot of people. And while people with autism have about 2.6 times the number of health conditions than neurotypical people, almost half of them do not have access to health care. About 87% of them are living with their parents because they can't live independently. So as now this big bolus of people is aging, you can imagine the stress this is going to be putting as the families are no longer able to take care of their children and they can't live independently. And so the result here is a lot of people over the age of 21 end up at home, graduating the couch, as Nina has said, and they're feeling isolated, they are depressed, and there's just a lot of negative things that come from all of that. So those are sort of the big picture problems that we're seeing. There is a big funding gap as well. So 17% of all autism research funding comes from private organizations. The rest is coming from federal sources. And as you look at that, we're thankful, of course, that we have that, but there's about 74 million that's currently donated for research programs and advocacy. That's a tiny amount of the funding that's out there compared to the 590 billion with a B dollar that's being donated to other causes and about 60 billion into the healthcare focused area. So we do think that, and the money that the government is spending is primarily for services, again, that are fairly outdated. So that's sort of just to frame up the situation for people who are not familiar. And with that, I think I'd like to turn to our panelists because you were all gracious enough to provide me your thoughts about these challenges. And we want to discuss, which areas are going to yield the highest impact to achieve equal opportunity in the next 5, 10, 50 years. Based on your responses, I'll select 2 of you to answer each question, but then the rest of you can chime in with your responses. So if we could, let me start with Nina and Moish. So you've said that currently people with autism and IDD are graduating to the couch due to benefit structures that disincentivize work. There's the 21 cliff, people losing services after they leave the school system, stigma, and other issues. You both feel that the society needs to shift away from the narrative to one of high expectations for all and allow people with autism to contribute their amazing gifts to our communities. So my question is, do you think that equal opportunity for people with autism is achievable in the next 50 years? And if so, where does the focus need to be? And Nina, specifically for you also, how is Taft prioritizing for funding and how do you decide to focus and manage on that and those priorities? And do you have any advice for the audience that is they're thinking about providing funding? So I'll leave that question to you both. Maybe start with Nina.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for setting the stage so well, and really grateful to be here today among such esteemed colleagues, thought partners, experts. So quite humbling. And thank you for having me as part of the conversation. So, um, in short, I am an eternal optimist. So I'm going to say yes, that this is achievable. But that said, as I think we probably all agree, we have a significant amount of work to do in order to get there. And I think that there are two primary things that I want to speak to. One is just this mindset shift, and I know Moish, you're probably much better equipped to talk about that. But we need to raise the expectations. We need to, for example, stop thinking about employment as a nice to have for some people with autism or other IDD, and we need to start expecting it as the future for every person, and then build the right systems that actually support the achievement of that goal. You set the stage in terms of the broken systems that unfortunately our providers and importantly our families are operating in. But I also want to highlight that we need to stop thinking in silos. Right? Everyone is in their lane, and life is not a lane. Life is actually an interconnected web. And so one thing at Taft that we focus on a lot is actually the interconnectedness of all of the different levers that we need to pull in order to drive change. Perhaps that's a good segue to Taft specifically. I've had the honor of leading this foundation for the last 7 years. We're a private foundation based in granting in New York City metro area as well as Southeast Florida. And pretty uniquely, we have a primary mission to help people with IDD lead fulfilling lives. We do that by funding service providers in particular across the lifespan of an individual and across the full range of support needs. And I think that's one of the reasons also I really welcome this context because it is actually quite rare to work in partnership with those who are also really trying to elevate and increase opportunities for those with high support needs. And at Taft, we really care about that end of the continuum as well. Um, we know that policy change is critical there. I think we're going to hear from some folks on this panel about that. Taft really focuses on services because there is incredible work that's happening right now, despite and in the face of these broken systems. And again, I think interconnectedness, right? If we can prove out services, then hopefully that will feed into better policies for evidence and demonstration. So, briefly, when Taft got started with this work, our board actually thought over a decade ago, oh, this is going to be about funding young children, right? This is going to be about diagnosis, early intervention. And now, with some hindsight, I'm going to say, fortunately, in the early days, they had an aha moment after talking to a parent of a young adult that lo and behold, kids grow up. And actually, we spend most of our life in adulthood. And that is where opportunity significantly, as we know, drops off. And so I give our board a lot of credit for shifting our focus early on to actually really focus on young adults and adults. We tend to think about our grant making in three buckets that shockingly are interconnected. The first is thrive and really creating pathways to thriving in adulthood. Um, if we're going to talk about employment, which is a key focus for us, increasing the rates of employment, then we actually believe we need to invest tremendously in transition services because we need to start earlier. We need to help young adults identify what are their interests, right? What drives them? What are they good at? We need to expose them to that. We need to set attainable goals and we need to link them to the services that can actually put them on the path to then achieve those goals. It is honestly no different from you and I in terms of exploring interests and then developing the skills around it. So in this Thrive bucket, it's a big focus on transition services and a big focus on employment opportunities. Over the last 5 years, we have invested around 6 million specifically in employment. That has resulted in about 4,000 individuals successfully securing employment. Retention rates and employment rates remain above average among our grantees, but that is a drop in the bucket, as we all know. And so we actually are very focused on how can we partner better, collaborate better in the employment space. Partner between work readiness organizations and employment supports. We just need more, and all kinds of different things. So we need to be open to different opportunities. Um, we also have a bucket of grants that is really about building inclusive opportunities, and that is how do we ensure that our individuals are connected to their communities, are participating in their communities, access to enrichment, wellness, arts and culture. What we're increasingly finding is that an area that is perhaps considered as a nice to have, right? Oh, yes, let me go to the museum or go to the theater. Actually, increasingly, we're seeing these programs are also building the skills to make someone work ready and perhaps pursue employment. So, again, I think that's a good example of the interconnectedness. And finally, it's about access to resources and building strong ecosystems. So we focus a lot in particular on family navigation. These systems are incredibly complicated to navigate. There is no quarterback, there is no champion, right? The individual and their caregivers and their support network, that's it. And so we need to provide assistance so that folks know where to turn to and what resources are available to them. Let me just end. I know there's a lot to be said here, but in terms of funders, right, we are a bit of a unicorn. We're not the only ones doing this work, but there aren't many. This is a field that is largely publicly funded and compliance driven as a result. And private philanthropy, those dollars are flexible, right? So we fund enhancements, we fund innovation, things that public funding otherwise doesn't. We invest in people, in infrastructure, sometimes really the unattractive plumbing stuff of an organization. But it needs to happen so that leaders like ones on this panel can actually do the creative thinking and drive forward within our systems. But because there are so few of us dedicated to investing in this system, one of the things also that we're really focused on is how can we attract other funders to this space, right? There is a lot of investment in youth workforce development, for non-disability focused, mainstream, so to speak. Our folks are walking through the doors of those organizations, and I think increasingly there's an awareness of that. And those organizations need to also have the skills to support these individuals. And funders need to be aware that it is not about disability funders and mainstream funders, right? If we want workforce development for all and employment for all, then we can all be part of that solution. So that's another focus of ours, is actually to draw others into this space that they might not think is theirs, but it actually is.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we have a lot of people on the call right now that this is their focus, and we're really excited to connect you all together, because I do think you're right that the connectivity is really important and being able to leverage what each other are doing. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I know, Moish, you also wanted to add something here as well, right?
Yes. Uh, s- Starting with the question, I believe that we can make this population uh, and give them the opportunity to be contribute to society. I think that we have to look into multiple things. Nina touched into a few of those. So one is we have to look into a lifespan because we're dealing with human beings and they're like us. Uh, so we have to change the view and instead of break the lifespan into pieces, we have to look into a lifespan as a whole. The other thing that I think that is going to be important to understand, when you look into the lifespan and looking into 10 years from now, people that now in school, 15 years in school, are going to be 25. People that are 30 or 35 going to be 45 or 55. If you look 20 years down the road, we're going to start to see some of this population that's growing, getting to be elderly. So we have to look into the whole lifespan and think about, okay, how do we move them and create the opportunities? One thing that we see in JoyDew, there are multiple things, but first, this is a pool of talent that can be contribute to any companies because talent it is the most important resource for companies, and we have to make sure that corporation companies or anybody like that understand that we have invisible talent pool and we can use it. The second thing is we have to create holistic environment. We at JoyDew call it whole life solution, and we look into, yes, employment is very important, and we have to have different type of employment models so we can address different people with different type of support. The second is employment is one piece, but if we want people to show to work every day, we have to create the environment that they need, and this is including housing, including social life, so they will have the same environment that everybody else is doing. And it's very important to understand that if we want someone to show to work, they have to have the other pieces of the life, the housing and the social life together with that. So we have to think about holistic solutions that are individual centric and look into it and said, okay, what will happen? What do we have to do in order to get them into the future? Um, the thing that need to be done is a lot of innovation. We have to innovate. We have to innovate new business models. We have to innovate new employment model, new housing models, and look at this in holistic. And we have to connect between different organizations that are doing it. And the one thing that I see as a challenge that we have to overcome is finding the funding for innovation. Uh, there
Yes.
is money that comes from the government and people can use it, but we have to find a funding for the innovation. And the last thing that I'm going to say is uh, the world is changing very fast. Technology is coming in. We're hearing about AI, and AI going to be a tool that we're going to use. I look into the autism and I said, okay, autism is another AI, autism intelligence. If we take the autism intelligence and train them with AI, that's going to be a major contribution to them as well as to companies, as well as to the societies. So innovation and funding, it is critical for us to get into the future.
Thank you, Moish. Unless anybody else wants to talk specifically about the funding, I'd like to play on this concept of the ecosystem and the connectedness, and also the public policy component as well. And Rob and Jose, you both have discussed the issue of the current benefit structures disincentivizing employment and the need for alignment, integration, and optimization of the ecosystem across all levels of society, as Moishe was talking about. And this includes everything from the individual knowledge and attitudes to the education system, to housing, to town square, to the marketplace, as Vincent says. How do you envision that practically happening? And what funding areas do you believe will yield the highest and most immediate impact? That's for Rob and Jose.
Rob, do you want to go first?
I'll give it a shot, Jose, and I know Jose and I talk about this a lot. And you couldn't really have anybody better here than Jose, who
Likewise.
has an awesome number of ideas about how to build out this ecosystem. But so I guess, I'm as you said at the beginning, I'm a business school professor. And there's a few things that are important to say about that. One is, we're interested in how systems can be built that work in a way that allows them to sustain themselves, which means many of these solutions must work as business propositions for us to see a lot of take up that in order, as somebody said to me in one of Jose's colleagues, not at SAP but at another company, he said, we're not trying to push everybody to measure their worth in a profit frame, but if things are profitable and if we can make the business case, then we can do an awful lot more of this, right? So that's kind of an interest. The other thing I like to point out is that because we're about studying the organizational arrangements and the ecosystems and so forth, we're not actually clinical experts, right? We get asked questions sometimes that I tell my team, that's not a question we can really answer because we're not experts in autism or any of the other neurodistinct conditions. But if the perspective we bring to it is kind of an ecosystem perspective. So I like that you're using that word. And, there's a lot of analogies. There's a lot of business research on what makes for thriving entrepreneurial ecosystems, for example. And we can empirically look across different regions and see that some entrepreneurial ecosystems function better than others. And so there's active research into what causes that to be the case. Not surprisingly, the answer is multifaceted. It has to do with not just one component. It's all of the things that you mentioned before, Karen. It's the social institutions, it's the business arrangements, it's the schooling, it's all sorts of things. But one of our focuses, and Jose and I have talked a lot about this, as I said, is on places where currently the ecosystem undersupplies things that we know it would be better if they supplied more of it, right? So one example would be employment, right? For people on the autism spectrum. And often when you see this happening in business contexts, and I'm going to get a little bit nerdy academic here, it's because of what is called a public goods problem, right? That there's something fundamental in the structure of the ecosystem that is causing people to be incentivized incorrectly, and therefore we're undersupplying something we'd all like to have more of. And the analogy is usually to things like infrastructure, right? So if we need to put a lot of copper wire into the world for telephones to work, the problem is the people who want to make use of that from a business standpoint stand back and wait for somebody else to make the investment, right? So there are a lot of things like this in the construction of ecosystems that there's infrastructure that people would like to access, but they don't want to pay for it all, right? And so a lot of the questions that we have about how to get things to work, and this is where maybe I should turn it over to Jose, have to do with creating mechanisms and elements of the ecosystem where things that have caused people to stand on the sidelines, companies, for example, because they don't want to pay for the cost, can figure out a way to get into it by sharing the cost. And this goes to a concept that that Jose has developed called a hub, and I'll let him talk more about that. But it is an example, Moish, of a holistic solution. It is, I think, key to finding the funding for innovation, as you said. And one of the things we study at Ivy is where does innovation come from? And we've created this notion we call a social innovation lab. JoyDew would be one, right? These are places where there are very interesting things going on, new approaches, new practical methods being developed. The other analogy, another one that we're all familiar with, Jen knows very well, it would be early specialist startup, right? The very biggest contributions in the earliest stages of specialist startup, and we became involved with them in 2006, 2 years after they were founded by Torkel Sona. But they created these practical methods for assessing skills that didn't depend as much on interviewing. And that has made a tremendous amount of difference, right? That companies have been able to adopt that as a practical matter. And so I guess I'm just restating, Moish, your argument that one of the fundamental problems with the ecosystem right now is that it's not very systematic or consistent or effective in funding these social innovation labs. I think we could accelerate progress a great deal if we could figure out how to get more funding to those. But I think I'm going to pause now because, Jose, I don't know if this is what you wanted to talk about, but I'm thinking of your idea of hubs and how those could become a part of the ecosystem. And I think Jose's, every time I talk to Jose, he pulls up another PowerPoint slide presentation where he's got this already all worked out, right? So,
all right, let's hear it then.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ralph, for the friendship and for 12 years of collaboration already. And thank you, Moish and team, all the panelists, for the honor of being here with you. I really appreciate the opportunity. I spent many years in the private sector, and now I'm part of the Autism Society. And when I was in the private sector, I was focused on employment, and I thought it was a humongous space. But then when I came to the Autism Society and started looking at things from the perspectives that Nina so eloquently described earlier, in which I'm going to try to repeat back to you guys and do some computations to give you an idea on the size of the problem that we are trying to solve for. Okay. First and foremost, the Autism Society looks at the span life of an individual, ranging from early childhood all the way to senior adulthood. So we have identified 7 areas or 7 age groups there, starting with infant and then toddler, early childhood, and so on. Just 7 of them. Okay, so I'm going to use my hands a lot to give an idea of a matrix. Okay, that we're going to be drawing here, imaginary matrix. And then we have the rows on that matrix that would involve areas that we believe to be what we call life essentials. And they include education, housing, health and well-being, care and safety, employment, transportation, and then belonging and community life. So now you have your 7 by 7 matrix. Let's multiply that by 3 profiles of autism, as known today, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And now multiply that by who are the stakeholders. One stakeholder group would be caretakers, the parents, for example, or it would be the autistic individual, or it could be, let's summarize all of the organizations that support into one line, which is going to be completely unfair. But if you do that 7 by 7 by 3, and then you dig down into employment, for example, and you say employment for who? Employment for parents that have an autistic child, employment for individuals who are on the spectrum with high needs, employment training for students. Let's say that each one of those boxes has 10. And I'm being super, super conservative. We would come up with a problem space with 11,470 problem areas to solve for. Today, they are not very well orchestrated. Today, in the United States, there's about 1,700 organizations that cater to the needs of autistic people. Okay, about 840 of those have a combined income of about $3 billion. It's deeply fragmented in that problem space. So the problem that I was trying to solve with Rob was the problem of employment for adults, which is maybe 3 or 4 little cells in that multidimensional matrix that has 11,000 spaces, right? And really, in my opinion, one of the things, and I'm going to go directly to the solution space that I have discussed with Rob and with some friends from Microsoft and EY and some other places, is that technology, I think, is going to be playing a significant. So there's 2 elements of this. One is going to be a technology platform that allows us to work better together. Okay. And the second one is going to be a governance model that allows us also to work better together so that we are not running into each other. I did a little survey of about 60 organizations that have autism-related training, and 49 of them had the autism one-on-one training. Each one of them were very proud of their materials, created their own thing. But if you take that one organization spent maybe fully loaded cost of about $8,000 and create that training, which is not unreasonable. Fully loaded cost includes production of materials, if they have it recorded, the graphics, the visuals, the preparation of curriculum. 8,000 is kind of cheap, to be honest. And you multiply that by 40. That's going to give you $320,000 that were collectively invested in the same asset across these organizations. And it's just a tremendous amount of waste of resources and duplication of work. I came across this problem in a more isolated, let's say, bubble of employment, right, many years ago. And that's what drove some of the conversations with Rob. And I said, Rob, how do we prevent this from happening? I mean, when I was with SAP, I was so proud of the training that we produced. And I'm sure that my colleagues from the other companies who also produce their own training were very proud. But would it be possible for us to be able to pitch into a mechanism, we're going to call it a hub for now, that would be able to be the recipient of these resources in such a way that a company, instead of investing $1 in the creation of that resource that everybody is duplicating, that we would invest 5 cents. But we will get 3x the benefit, because now when you multiply those 5 cents across so many companies and you standardize curriculum, okay, I'm talking about training, but there might be many other things, it would have an incredibly impactful result. The question again goes back, Karen, into how do we manage this through governance and through technology. And I believe that's something that that is a big problem to be solved. We are looking, and I'm going to just put my Autism Society hat here. One of the key areas that I'm focusing on is digital transformation. And we have, for example, 70 offices in the United States. We serve about 500,000 people in the US. 500,000 people represents approximately 6% of the autism population in the US, which is around 8 million, roughly, in round numbers speaking. And I'm thinking, how do I go from servicing 500,000 to servicing 2 million? And if we go with the brick and mortar model, in which we need to open up new subsidiaries, we have 70 offices in the United States right now. It would take us forever to do something like that. And what we're finding out is that technology is going to be the conduit that allows us to reach more people more deeply. So if there is a person I live in Austin, Texas, in a little town in Texas that has very limited services, we would need to have the digital capabilities to bring the service to the individual and move and change the paradigm from moving the individual to the service. And that would allow us to scale significantly the reach, the depth, and the impact that we have across our community. So that's a problem that we're trying to solve. If anybody's interested on how we're trying to solve that problem, we have divided it into 5, 6 different areas. And I would be more than happy to share with anyone in the community that is interested in knowing how we're looking at solving that problem. Not exclusively through technology, but with the help of technology. We still need the humans in the middle. As Moish was saying, AI, we hear it all the time. But I am certainly convinced that the human in the loop is really the center of the solution that we need to provide.
Thank you, Jose. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that topic before we move to employment or continue employment? Okay. All right. So thank you for that. That was amazing, Jose. And I'm sure many people will be interested to learn more about that. So if we have some materials to share, maybe Ellie can add that to the post-meeting follow-up materials so people can learn more about that solution. So let's move to Vincent and Jen for a moment. So you both spoke about the need to shift managers' mindset from inclusion as compliance to a real performance advantage and leveraging those unique gifts of people with autism. And this requires overcoming barriers in hiring, which that was touched on a little bit, but also other things like upskilling processes, for example, and building workplace accommodations into the physical environment as well as policies routinely. So my question for you is, what models do you think could work, and what investments do you think would yield the highest and most immediate impact in the next 5, 10, and 50 years? And maybe investments is the wrong term there, more thinking about funding. So what are your thoughts on that?
Vincent, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Karen. Well, so that you understand the way I try to bridge research and employment practice, allow me perhaps to say a few words about my background. At École des Ponts Business School in Paris, I work for a new research center on the management of neurodiversity in the workplace called Think Differently, and it's written right behind me. And before academia, actually, I spent years in business in the head office of Ford Motor Company in the US, and at Toyota in Japan, at PwC in London, among others. And about your question, now you are going to understand how this whole fits together. A couple of years ago, in 2023, as a matter of fact, the Prime Minister's office here asked us to make recommendations to do exactly what you asked. We identified 80 good practices to help businesses build a real performance advantage through neurodiversity. And at the end of the day, if you want a company to raise its collective intelligence, you need neurodiversity at team level, not just a few isolated hires. And we've seen that business really start thinking differently when there is an internal demand for these cognitive competencies. Rather than pushing for inclusion in the old-fashioned way, therefore the number one challenge is to create a new internal pool, if I may say, for different thinking talent. When that happens, then the conversation can shift, and it becomes less about compliance and more about leveraging neurodiversity as a competitive advantage to accelerate innovation, productivity, performance. You've said it. So that's a long-term vision when you ask in terms of time scale, and it will take time and sustained efforts to get there. And so in the meantime, in my view, we need to improve HR and recruitment systems so they can account for the cognitive biases of recruiters and managers doing the recruiting, participating into the recruiting. And those, I'm talking about the biases that can lead them to screen out unconsciously, this is not conscious. And they screen out some of the most talented technical candidates basically because they look awkward. This kind of research has been done quite extensively close to you in Texas, among other things. And so many mainstream hiring processes overweight emotional response to social signaling, such as small talk, eye contact, rapid back and forth exchanges. And they actually underweight what the candidate can actually do. This is probably what Jen is going to talk about. And the problem is not the recruiter. I'm not blaming them. And of course, we shouldn't blame the candidates. We couldn't blame the candidate of not being properly coached. That's not the point. The problem is the old-fashioned recruiting processes. And recruiting needs to be built around approaches to reduce social style biases, if I may say, i.e. targeted skills assessment, structured interviews, work sample tests, and paid work trials. Then we need to invest in job progression planning, coaching and mentoring, clear performance criteria, feedback systems, technical career tracks, internal mobility, process quality measurement. And what is great is that these processes are in the hands of managers, so we can control them and we can fix them within a 5 to 10 year time frame. And for instance, using Kaizen methodologies. So we know how to do that. It's within our control. Last but not least, we need to make sure that companies can tap into the pool of autistic talents who can't live independently. We've been talking about, Moshe has talked about it, and help them move from sheltered programs to mainstream companies. For them, housing is essential to get employment in regular companies, but implementation is still slow and heavily manager dependent. In France, we've been successfully experimenting with building housing for autistic people with high support need, close to their workplace in the private sector. We do this in partnership with autistic support NGOs, and actually it works. I'm really proud that I could recommend the national rollout of this model, so it's not an experimentation anymore. It is a national rollout that is state-financed as a program, as a state-financed program, and it was actually approved just a few months ago. The real challenge now is scaling. So with a motivated general manager, you probably understand you can do it quickly for 1 or 2 employees, no problem. Now, when you need supporting a dozen autistic employees, that becomes, in my view, a 5 to 10 year horizon. So to conclude this introduction, I would encourage you first to stay in touch. It's always a pleasure, but above all, to spread the good word. Hiring and retaining autistic employees is a real challenge. Increasing neurodiversity in the workplace has to be managed. Just like an international supply chain has to be managed. It's not more difficult and it's not easier. You don't do business with the French or the Japanese the same way you do with your neighbor. At first, they may feel a bit unfamiliar to you, and honestly, working with neurodivergent colleagues can feel similar. Autistic talents will look a bit awkward at first, there is no doubt about that, and they are very good at looking awkward. But they are also highly competent, highly productive, and they can create real team dynamism. So I'm asking your support here. Talk to people around you about hiring autistic people. When you do that, it will make a real difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Jen?
Thank you, and thank you for including us in this event. It's such a privilege. When we talk about shifting from inclusion as compliance to inclusion as a performance advantage, what we're really talking about is shifting from viewing support as a burden to seeing it as a catalyst. And so in the near term, it would be remiss for me to not share, despite the fact that this is a funding conversation, that most workplace accommodations cost nothing. 49% cost $0. And another 43% cost about $300 or under. And so this is not about a person being autistic. This is about environments that rely on hidden rules, archaic processes, and really apathetic systems. Most of us on this call have worked really hard. All of us on this call have worked really hard at changing the unemployment rate for autistic people. And we haven't made the dent that I hoped that we would make in the time that I've been at Specialist Sterna. And again, this is not about an autistic person. We're looking at how these systems respond to that autistic person's needs. And so in the midterm, we do need to be building some scalable pathways that blend learning and work. So in that 5 to 10 year window, the biggest leverage point is looking at these pilots, these side door programs that my organization and all of the other organizations have built up until this point. And I'm really glad that I get to echo the word ecosystem, because we really are looking at what an ecosystem means to autistic people. Academies or upskilling programs that pair work integrated learning are where an investment can be made over the course of the next 10 years to change the way that we build sustainable talent pipelines. And so in 2025, we did an analysis of work integrated learning programs, and we found that these work integrated learning programs are crucial for these employment outcomes, and the lack of access to real world placements is one of those primary barriers for the neurodivergent job seeker. What EY put out recently is, out of their neurodiverse centers of excellence, is research on what we're accustomed to: retention, long-term success, productivity teams, right? We've seen the research, but one of the things that jumped out in the most recent research that they've put out is that they've seen a 1 billion value creation estimation with neurodiverse teams. That's billion with a B. And so what we're seeing is the complementary nature of neurotypical and neurodivergent people working together is actually making a business money. So we've heard from our business partners really similar value creation stats. And the feedback that they've given us is that it's because of a few things. First of all, it starts with managers. People leave managers, they don't leave jobs, which is why that basic education and training that Jose was talking about, that neurodiversity 101, is so critical. And then we have to expand on that education. 101 is rudimentary for a reason. We have to talk about things like career development, advancement opportunity. How are you going to teach recruiters how to not judge the behavior of an autistic person, as opposed to having them demonstrate the competency that they have? What businesses are also doing is that they're matching people to the right role because they're testing their real capability up front. That saves a ton of money on mishiring, recruitment costs, and replacement costs. And so from a business ROI standpoint, this is not necessarily about it's a good thing to do for autistic people. This is actually really good for your business. We also hear things around career navigation support. If we're looking for a sustainable model, we do have to invest and fund programs that remember that recruitment isn't about hiring, it's about all the way through retirement. And so short cycle mentoring is a really critical component of how we advance autistic people, where it's structured and it's framed in a way where they can really lean into that process. It's proactively offered to them. And finally, we hear that clarity, when expectations are shared up front and they're objective, managers know how to measure whether or not somebody can do the job and do it well. The midterm is where capital can do what policy often can't do. It connects training to real demand by backing these kinds of academies or work integrated learning models that really create that durable pipeline. Now, if in my lifetime we see this, I'll be thrilled. But in that 50-year period, right, when we wave our magic wands and we hope that all of this work was worth it, what we will see is the design of workforces that do have inclusion at their core. So by 2035, Gen Z is going to be the largest generation in the global workforce at about 31%. And in 50 years from now, we'll see Gen Z's children and grandchildren entering our workforce, and they will be the AI native generations. And so what we're looking at as well is how Gen Z is going to enter into the workforce. And they're not going to enter quietly. 14% of Gen Z are identifying as neurodivergent compared to 3% in Gen X and 1% in boomers. 42% of Gen Z have reported asking an employer for an accommodation. But here's the disconnect. Only 65% of companies by disability and zone reporting state that they have a dedicated expert to resolve accessibility issues. So if you're not designing your accommodations and recruitment processes in a way that is proactively accommodating, Gen Z is going to say no to the job that you're offering them. And so part of this is about greater awareness and reduced stigma, but practically speaking, it means the next generation of talent is entering the workforce, expecting workplaces to be more human, more technologically savvy, more accessible, clearer norms, better support, managers equipped with empathy. This is what they're asking for. So 50 years out, the decisions that we're making now about funding, it does change the evolution of neurodiversity. Long term, we need to look at portable support systems. How does support follow an individual across state lines, across industries, from job to job? How are we going to make sure that we're universally designing workplaces to be have clarity, flexibility, and predictability at the core of what a job is? And we need to look at, to echo my colleagues here, deep integration of technology. AI is leveling the playing field for neurodivergent people. And so we see this now, and we will see this in the next 50 years. Karen, we're not receiving your audio.
Sorry, Jen. Hope I didn't cut you off in midstream there. So this is a great segue, Jen, for Dave to think about those advances in technology and especially in AI. It's been a hot topic in the world of autism for a while. And, some people, there's sort of a spectrum of thinking about it, that some people are afraid that AI is going to take away the job opportunities, especially for people on the spectrum. Others are in this sort of middle of the road approach of like adopt the unstoppable and mitigate the risks of that. And then there's others who see this as like, this could be the magic bullet that will allow finally neurodiverse adults to increase safety, social integration, allow them to fully join the workforce. They see this technology as being very promising. So I guess, Dave, where do you fall on this philosophical spectrum? And for the rest of you that wants to answer as well. And what technologies and applications do you think are most groundbreaking and worthy of funding?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with AI, AI has become a hot button topic for me over the last couple of years. I'm a physicist by training. The last 9 years or so, I've been focusing as a scientist, as a researcher on autism and employment. So I do autism and employment research, but I do have a lot of peers and colleagues in the AI world. We have a lot of close associations with the Data Science Institute over at Vanderbilt University. Because of it is a stereotype that all Aspies are IT nerds. then they're all like really good at coding. That's not at all true. The spectrum has people who are artists, musicians, people who can't code worth a darn. It's all over the place. But it is fair to say a significant fat fraction of ASD level ones, because logic and critical thinking just sort of naturally take to coding if it's taught properly. So we have a lot of autistic people in the tech world, and we have a lot of autistic people working on AI and stuff. So I get to talk to autistic people who are working with AI, and most of what the public thinks they know about what AI is and isn't capable of is overblown. People play with Chat GPT. They get the sense of, wow, Chat GPT is so smart. It knows all these things. It's able to figure out and predict what I want to say. And they don't recognize that Chat GPT doesn't think. It has no idea what it's saying. Like it's simply an algorithm that's going, all right, what's the next most likely word given the original prompts? And so it's building a sentence one word at a time. But ChatGPT itself doesn't understand that sentence, doesn't understand what it's saying. It's the illusion of intelligence. So sometimes there is an illusion that comes with AI that starts leading us to thinking that it's capable of things that it's really not. And I think we're in a bit of a rough spot in the technology world right now, because we got a lot of companies investing really big and promising the moon and promising the world that the AIs are going to do all these things that they can't actually do. And there's going to be a big, massive overcorrect for that. But there is actual science that's going on with AI, and there's some actual uses that could be with AI. I've seen some people looking at using AI to help out. It's a lot of times these research is centered for things that are going to help autistic people, but it doesn't just help autistic people. It kind of helps a wider audience. I always like that. It's easier to get the public to buy in a piece of tool or technology that makes it that I absolutely need to survive, but is kind of useful to everybody else. It's a lot easier to get people kind of on board with that. So some of the AI work that I've seen that has had some progress is like college syllabus. Every professor has their own style and format for writing a syllabus. You got to dig through this document that may or may not be easily readable to figure out when is your final, when is the homework assignment due, what your expectations are. So I've seen some teams building AI that you feed a syllabus into, and then it's just like a chat. And you ask it, hey, when's my next assignment due? And it takes the knowledge based off the syllabus and gives you an answer in a simple, plain English response sort of thing. That's something that could help people with executive function issues or learning difficulties that might be struggling with some of these formats, be able to put it in a more accessible format. But I think all of us could benefit from just being able to feed a complex document to an AI and say, hey, can you just give me the answer? What is this thing actually saying? That's something we could all kind of benefit from. A lot of the technologies that I'm kind of excited about are like with the driving simulator. So we're at the commercialization phase at the Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation. Our deputy director, Nilanjan Sakar, who works in the School of Engineering, has created a driving simulator specifically aimed at autistic people. Now, those of us who are capable of driving, it's a frightening low statistic how many of us actually get driver's licenses. And the problem with that is that traditional ways that's taught does not work well for us. I remember when I was learning how to drive, it took me a couple of years. I was very fortunate. I grew up on a farm out on a bunch of dirt roads, so I could practice all I want without any witnesses or other cars or lights or, until I got it all down. And when I did finally learn how to drive, I was very salty and chewed out both my parents because they taught me wrong. It wasn't years and years later I got my autism diagnosis that I realized they didn't teach me wrong. They taught me like you would teach a normal person, and that just doesn't work for me. So the Nilanjan and their team could recognize this deficit. And it's ironic because when autistic people do get driver's licenses, we're much safer than the general public. He saw the problem, identified some of the issues, and created this technology. And so it aims specifically at how the autistic brain learns, the ways that things need to be taught to us. We're very detail-oriented thinkers. You can't just tell me, go the speed limit, this is what you do at the lights, this is when you yield, this is when you have right. I mean, I need to know that stuff just like everybody else. But I also needed to be taught things like, how long does my gaze stay on the road ahead? How frequently do I check my side view mirrors or my speedometer? How long does my gaze linger when I'm checking on those things? So the driving simulator has eye tracking software, and it can track when the learner is spending too much time gazing off to the side or staring at their knobs or something, and give them that feedback so they can be thinking about, all these little micro detail sort of things that they have to practice until they get comfortable and familiar with. They have other technologies with VR where we're building interview simulators and social simulators to help autistic people practice things. You know, one of the biggest, when I got diagnosed, I was in my 30s and I was giving this college thing a try and figuring all that out. You know, it was a shock to learn that my weirdness had a name and other people out there have the same sorts of struggles I have. But in that moment, when I found out we make up like 2-3% of the population, broke my heart. Nobody should have to go through what I went through just to figure out how to function in a workplace where my coworkers are not trying to get me fired or my boss is not angry at me for a reason that I don't understand. And I'm able to actually figure out what they're saying when they give me, instructions and stuff. If you see somebody like me as an invisible disability in the workplace, if you see somebody like me and I'm capable of verbalizing and talking, I forgive you for not realizing that I'm autistic or that I have some struggles that people might not necessarily recognize. There are, from my perspective, people within the neuromajority have this amazing superpower to walk into an alien environment where it's a different culture, different norms, and within a couple weeks of just yada yada their way into understanding and walking and talking and acting like everybody else, and has picked up on all these invisible skills and stuff that they need to function effectively as a part of that community and stuff. We got to recognize that human instincts do a lot of heavy lifting for things like that. And we're not used to teaching people how to do things like that. Those of us who are born with some of those instincts missing or functioning a little bit differently need a little bit of hand-holding. We need somebody to explain how those professional cultures work in a way that makes sense to us. And so there's a lot of potential for, as researchers and as scientists, as we're figuring out what works and how it works, the technology is there that's going to allow us to be able to scale some tools and stuff to get that in the hands of people that need it.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate that. And we have some questions here from the audience that are kind of in line with some of these things. So I thought I would go ahead and ask those. One of them is, we have an audience member, Heidi Rome. She says she has a talented non-speaking son who's 20. And she's looking for concrete action steps that parents can take of emerging adults to take the best actions toward connecting with this interconnected pipeline. And she also mentioned that she is wondering if we see an opening of awareness of the emerging typing with assisted technology and spelling that have an impact on the general work world. The communication is a big issue for many people, and having tools to empower non-speakers to interact and connect. She's wondering if that's something that
Yeah, and in fact, I'd like to start off by sharing with folks a little bit about the First Center for Autism and Innovation itself. We are a research center. We're not a clinic. We don't provide services. We're not charging for anything. Our day job is we're scientists, and we're trying to figure out what is needed for autistic individuals to find and thrive in meaningful employment from a strengths-based approach. And we've been doing this work in one form or another since 2017 when we began. And within a month that we started is when the public started reaching out to us. And when I was getting calls from the public initially, I was like, how do you even know about us? Like, we barely exist. We barely started working. It didn't take me long to realize, oh, we walked out into the desert and opened a lemonade stand. Like, people who are desperately looking for help with autism and employment are finding anything that might possibly, and as scientists, we do this job to help people. That's what we're there for. So we're always happy to talk to the public, learn their individual issues, learn their individual stories, and then maybe try to point them towards some resources or some tips or suggestions that can help them along the way. We just started doing that, and I started collecting data from the people that were reaching out to us. And my database has grown to I've got about 650 individuals that I've sat down with and talked about their individual neurodivergence and how it's impacting them and what sort of accommodations and supports they're looking for, what sort of skills gaps are they trying to address, and we're always happy to talk to people. I tell folks, if I spend an hour with you and I can help you try to figure out something, first and foremost, that doesn't just help you, it potentially lays out a roadmap for other people with similar issues. But also as a scientist, I get valuable data out of that. Over half of what the Frisk Center does today organically came about from those sort of one-on-one sort of conversations with the public. So anyone, anywhere in the world who is autistic and neurodivergent or suspect they're autistic and neurodivergent and have any questions that might have an impact relating to employment can think of us as a resource. They can go to our website, they can reach out to us. I'd be happy to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with them. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. But autism and employment is one of my passions that I've been working on for many years, and I can talk at length about it. And chances are really good that I'm aware of what resources are out there that might be of interest to you. So first and foremost, please use us as a resource. Always happy to talk. Now, is she really touching on the nonverbal thing? It's dicey to help somebody like me get a job, and I can be hyperverbal, and I have a PhD. I have a lot of things kind of working on my favor, and yet still there are a lot of challenges for me to find and thrive in meaningful employment. Somebody who's non-speaking or minimally speaking, and as you guys alluded to earlier, there's a lot of people on the spectrum that struggle with communication in one form or another. Yeah, they need they need help with that. In that regard, there are a number of things that could potentially help, but I'm not going to fill up all our time. I would say to the person who reached out on that, please reach out to me and we'll have a hour-long conversation about this.
Thank you, Dave. And we'll make sure to get your contact information shared so that she can do that. Thank you. Jen, I see you have your hand raised.
I do. I think also Moish wanted to share something,
Mhm.
but just very quickly, I wanted to highlight that one of the focuses that we have that we are in fact at this time looking for funding for is a partnership that we've started to establish with one of the Frisk Center for Autism research projects and the organization that won the Neurotech Frontier Summit Award this year, which is Improvise. The idea is that they're leveraging AI and virtual reality to be able to train school teachers on building empathy and compassion, specifically to address the double empathy problem, but using the tool of improvisation so that we can really have dynamic conversations without risking the health and safety of an autistic person by asking them directly. And so what we're trying to do is adapt some of the learning models that they've created in a school system to create an empathy experience for a hiring manager, for the nonverbal individual as well. The point would be that they would experience what it would be like to interact with the non-speaking individual, what it feels like to manage that individual without harming that individual and frustrating that individual. Once they have that experience, then we can feel comfortable with the idea that they could onboard this person successfully and manage this person over time because they've had that training. Those kinds of technologies are requiring funding and investment. It's very expensive to develop virtual reality technologies and provide the goggles that are necessary for the corporate partners that we have. And so the seed funding for something like that is really significant, but the high impact on the other end of that is also incredibly significant for that particular population. And so that is something that we are actively working on. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't even happen maybe in that 10-year time frame, but hopefully we can get started on it soon and we can work with Frisk to be able to develop something that does leverage all of their connections and roll that out really successfully.
Moish, you had something you'd like to add? I think you're muted there.
Yes.
Yeah.
First, I want to play with my hat as a parent. For us, the clock is ticking. And the milestones, and Jose talked about 7 of those. For us as parents, there is the 21 cliff when they move for the education into adulthood. And the second one, which is very important, is after us. What will happen to our kids when we cannot give them the support that they need? So I think that if we're looking into the next 10 years, we have to start to be practical, and we start to have practical solution, and we have to get the ideas, the research that are being done into a practical models of employment, models of life. And we need to do it fast because time is running out, and today there are in the US 5 million people in adulthood, and the families are looking for solution, and they're looking for solution right now. And I think that if I look into what being said, I'm going to what Rob said, we have to put the right incentive in front of the major stakeholders. So the incentive will drive to a practical solution. And I think that the number one stakeholders that we have to find the incentive, it is a foundation, because the government moving slow. And we need to get funding to all of these different ideas and get it to a practical solution so we can offer a solution in the next 10 years. And while we're doing that with technology and people, we have to look into the next 20 years and find the way to put the incentive to get funding for the solution, funding for collaboration between all of us. Jose, you said that there is 11,000 organization just in the US. We have to find a way, how do we leverage this community that have different solutions? But we have to be practical, and we have to move fast. And someplace there need to be a hub or a technology that provide parent the information about the different element that they need to deal with, from communication to deal with government or to get their kids employment. So I think that the ideas that are being said over here, there are a lot of great ideas, but we have now to get into the practical mode and said, okay, what's the next step? How do we move the needle? How do we get and said, okay, yes, technology work. We have the hub, we have the metrics that Jose said, and we took the most important things. But we have to put the incentive in front of the stakeholders, and we have to get parents to understand and to have access to it. So we addressing this issue now, and we are not like getting together in 10 years from now and say, okay, fine. We still on the theory level and not on the practical levels. And somehow we have to make it happen.
Thanks, Moish. Anybody else want to have anything else to say to Heidi as she tries to figure out what to do today?
Karen, I'm happy to chime in. I think on two fronts. One, just on this question of what can a parent do now and the action steps as an individual is, this emerging adult. And I think obviously Heidi, you're doing it already in terms of showing up for a panel like this and seeking all of the information. possible and asking the questions. And I would say, which I would suspect you are also already doing, right? This never to stop advocating within the systems that you are in. And that brings me back to this transition services piece. We know that the transition services are still lacking and inadequate in schools. But you need to keep pushing and make sure that they are supporting you in this emerging adulthood time and helping you get to the necessary resources. I do look forward to the day when technology, as someone on the panel said today, right, is shifting the paradigm and bringing the services to the individual rather than the other way around. I love that idea. Um, Funding has come up a ton. And as the funder on this panel, I feel compelled to speak to that. I have gathered so many ideas in this conversation. I think that again, I come back to the theme of collaboration and partnership, right? Right now, I appreciate that government moves slowly, and we need to look to the funding sources that are able to work more nimbly. That is the foundation and the philanthropy system in this country. But there is also, frankly, the corporate sector and corporate philanthropy here, and especially around technology. We need that kind of investment as well. And if we can make that case that Vincent, you so compellingly made, and Jose, right? This is actually, and Jen, a value creation for the companies and for the businesses. Um, they actually also have the dollars to invest here because foundations are um, the sad part of the foundation equation is that they also can tend to be very risk averse and are looking for the data first that they can invest in. Again, I hear the charge to also do that work with my peers to help educate and to help understand that we need investments across the risk spectrum, if you will, in order to move some of this from research to practice. So lots of work to be done. I'm afraid no single silver bullet.
So true. Well, I think we're out of time, everybody, but I wanted to thank all of you, panelists. You've always been so collaborative, and we appreciate your time and just excellent thinking on this important set of topics. And I know everybody who joined us, I love the puppy dog there, by the way, Dave. So thank you for joining us too. But no, we really appreciate the thoughtful responses. And I also want to thank the audience for joining us. You all out there are the people who are helping to make all of this happen. And so hopefully this was useful for you all. We'll look forward to sending you a follow-up message with the links to everything and access to the materials. And we'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you all so much for joining us today.